I always thought our life was picture perfect. Mark and Rachel, the power couple. We had it all. A stunning house in an upscale neighborhood, careers that made people envy us, and the kind of marriage that seemed effortless from the outside. But, as I've come to learn, appearances can be the most deceptive thing in the world. Rachel was the type of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone stop talking. Not because she was loud, but because she didn't have to be. She had this magnetic pull, the kind that made you feel lucky just to stand in her orbit. I met her during a corporate networking event 8 years ago. She spilled wine on my suit, laughed about it, and instead of feeling embarrassed, she somehow made me feel like it was my fault. That should have been the first red flag. But love, or whatever I thought was love, makes you blind. The first few years were great. We traveled, hosted dinner parties, and built a life filled with shared dreams and plans. But somewhere along the way, small cracks started to form. I thought it was just the usual wear and tear of marriage. Long hours at work, stress, life pulling us in different directions. She started suggesting we needed help to get back on track. A marriage counselor. His name was Dr. Elliot Green. Polished, articulate, with that calm, therapist voice that made you feel like your emotions were fragile glass he had to handle with care. I hated him the second I met him, though I couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was the way he looked at Rachel. Too attentive, too understanding. Or maybe it was how Rachel responded, laughing at his jokes more than she did at mine, her eyes lighting up in ways they hadn't when she looked at me anymore. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Isn't that the whole point of therapy? To be vulnerable? To open up? So I did. I sat there in his perfectly decorated office, talking about my childhood, my stress at work, my fears. Laying myself bare while Rachel sat beside me, nodding along like she was the supportive wife, her hand occasionally resting on mine like a well-rehearsed performance. I didn't see it then, but looking back, I realized I wasn't in therapy. I was on trial, and Dr. Green wasn't our counselor. He was her accomplice. I'll never forget the moment I first felt something was really off. It was subtle, a text message. I wasn't snooping. I was just grabbing her phone to check the time while mine was charging. But her screen lit up with a message from e.g. Same time tomorrow? I can't stop thinking about last night. My heart didn't race. It didn't even sink. It just paused, like the world held its breath with me. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe, but deep down I knew. That was the day the perfect picture shattered. I didn't confront her right away. I don't know why. I guess part of me was afraid of what she'd say. There's a strange comfort in denial, like standing in the eye of a storm, pretending the winds around you aren't about to tear everything apart. Instead, I watched. I became an observer in my own life, noting every detail like a detective in a case I didn't want to solve. Rachel's behavior had shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore now that I was looking for it. She was always busy. Late meetings, impromptu errands, suddenly passionate about activities she never cared for before. Yoga classes, volunteer events, book clubs she'd never mention again after attending. She'd come home with that glow, the kind she never had after any of our therapy sessions. And Dr. Green? His name started to pop up more often, casually woven into conversations like background noise. Elliot recommended this. Or Elliot says it's healthy to have space. First name basis, of course. I started noticing little things. The faint smell of a different cologne clinging to her when she returned late at night. The way she kept her phone face down. The sudden password change she claimed was for security. The more I saw, the more I questioned myself. Was I being paranoid? Suspicious without reason? But that message, it echoed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. I can't stop thinking about last night. One evening, she came home later than usual. I was sitting in the living room, lights dimmed, pretending to read. She walked in, startled to see me awake, her smile just a little too forced. "Hey, you're up late," she said, setting her purse down, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." I kept my voice even casual. "Long day." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to be noticeable. "Yeah, work's been crazy. We had a last-minute strategy meeting." Strategy meeting. right? At 10:30 p.m., dressed like she'd been at a cocktail party. I nodded, pretending to buy it, while something inside me twisted. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. It wasn't easy. She had changed the password, but after watching her unlock it enough times, I'd memorized the pattern. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. Nothing too damning at first, just friendly exchanges with colleagues, some with friends. But then I found a hidden thread. She'd renamed his contact again. This time he was saved as Yoga Group. Clever. I opened the chat. Missed you today. Yesterday was incredible. I can still feel you. Me too. Mark suspects nothing. That was it. The confirmation I didn't want but couldn't ignore. The ground beneath me didn't crack or collapse. It stayed solid, which somehow made it worse. I put the phone down quietly, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to her soft breathing beside me. The rage didn't come right away. Neither did the heartbreak. No, what settled in that night was something colder, sharper. Revenge wasn't an impulse. It was a decision. The morning after discovering the messages, I woke up before Rachel. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd stared at countless times before, but it looked different now. Maybe because I wasn't the same man lying beneath it. I didn't feel the kind of rage you see in movies, no screaming, no broken dishes, just a cold, methodical calm. Like the flick of a switch had turned off every emotion except one. Purpose. Rachel stirred beside me, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. She stretched, rolled over, and gave me that same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. The same smile she probably gave him. Morning, she murmured, her voice soft and warm. I forced a smile. Morning. She went about her routine like nothing had changed, because for her nothing had. She'd been living this double life, and I'd been too blind to see it. But now that I knew, the dynamic shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. I started playing a role. A character in a story she didn't know I was writing. I acted normal, even affectionate. I asked about her day, feigned interest in her work, and kept up the illusion of a husband blissfully unaware. But underneath it all, I was collecting data, watching her every move, every lie slipping from her lips with practiced ease. I even suggested we schedule another session with Dr. Green. Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. A flicker of hesitation before she nodded. That's a great idea. It'll be good for us. The word felt like poison. I scheduled the appointment, but not for the reason she thought. I needed to see him face to face. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who thought he could steal from me, because that's what this was. Theft, not just of my wife, but of my trust, my time, my life. In the days leading up to the session, I did my homework. I started digging into Dr. Green's background. Nothing illegal on the surface, but I wasn't looking for crimes. I was looking for cracks, weaknesses, something I could use. And I found them. A second phone number registered under a different name. A private post office box. Financial transactions that didn't quite add up. The man was hiding things. Good. That meant he was vulnerable. When the day of the session arrived, I dressed carefully, nothing too formal, nothing too casual. Just enough to look like a man trying to fix his marriage, not destroy it. Rachel wore a soft blue blouse, the kind she knew I liked. Funny how people put on their best when they're hiding the worst. We walked into Dr. Green's office like any other couple. He greeted us with that calm, soothing voice, the one designed to make you feel safe. But I wasn't here to feel safe. I was here to start the war. Walking into Dr. Green's office felt different this time. The room was the same, soft lighting, neutral tones. The faint scent of some overpriced candle meant to create a calming environment. But it didn't feel calming. Felt like a stage. And I wasn't just a participant anymore. I was the director. Dr. Green stood up when we entered, giving Rachel that warm, practiced smile. The one that probably made her feel seen, heard, understood, all the things I was apparently failing to provide at home. His handshake was firm, confident. I squeezed back just a little harder, letting him feel the tension beneath the surface. Good to see you both again, he said, gesturing for us to sit. What's been on your minds lately? Rachel jumped in first, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. I think we've been doing better. Mark's been more open, and I've been trying to communicate more clearly. I nodded, playing along. Yeah, things have been clearer. Dr. Green gave me that thoughtful therapist look, the one where they slightly tilt their head like they're dissecting your soul. But he wasn't dissecting mine. I was dissecting his. As Rachel talked about our progress, I watched him. The way his eyes flicked toward her a little too often, how his posture shifted subtly when she spoke. Leaning in, engaging like her words mattered more than mine. But here's the thing about people who think they're smarter than you. They get careless. They underestimate you. I decided to test the waters. You know, I said, leaning back casually, I've been thinking a lot about trust lately, how fragile it is, how easy it is to break without even realizing it. Rachel gave me a quick glance, her smile tightening just a fraction. Green nodded thoughtfully. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. It's good you're reflecting on that. Oh, I've been doing more than reflecting, I said, my tone light but with an edge sharp enough to slice through the room. I've been observing, noticing things I didn't before. Rachel shifted slightly in her seat, crossing her legs, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Dr. Green stayed composed, but there was the smallest twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of unease. I smiled inwardly. Gotcha. I've realized how easy it is to miss the obvious, I continued, locking eyes with him. Sometimes the truth is sitting right in front of you, but you're too distracted to see it. Silence hung in the air for a beat too long. Rachel cleared her throat. What do you mean, Mark? I turned to her, my expression softening into the perfect mask. Just that I've been blind to certain things. But not anymore. Dr. Green shifted in his chair. A subtle move, but I caught it. The man was uncomfortable. Good. That's exactly where I wanted him. The session wrapped up with the usual hollow advice about communication and vulnerability. Ironic, considering the secret they were both hiding. But as we stood to leave, I made my first real move. I paused at the door, turned back to Dr. Green, and said with a casual smile, You know, Elliot, I've been thinking about doing some consulting work myself, maybe digging into people's backgrounds. It's fascinating what you can find when you know where to look. His smile faltered just a little, barely noticeable. But it was there. As Rachel and I walked out, I didn't feel like a broken man trying to save his marriage. I felt like a predator who had just scented blood. After that session, everything changed. Not for Rachel, not for Dr. Green, but for me. I'd always thought of myself as a logical man. Someone who could compartmentalize emotions, handle stress, and focus on solutions. That's what made me successful in my career. But nothing in business had ever prepared me for this. Betrayal wasn't just a setback. It was personal. I didn't confront them, not yet. Confrontation is emotional, reckless. I wasn't looking for closure. I wasn't looking to understand. I was building something far more satisfying than an argument. I was building their downfall. First, I started with Rachel's routine. I knew her schedule like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. But betrayal hides in the spaces between what you know and what you assume. So I stopped assuming. I installed a tracking app on her phone. She never noticed. People like Rachel are too confident when they think they're smarter than you. She thought I was still oblivious. The same fool sitting in therapy, pouring my heart out while she passed herself off as the victim of a disconnected husband. But I wasn't disconnected anymore. I was dialed in, sharper than ever. The data rolled in faster than I expected. Visits to unfamiliar addresses during times she claimed to be at work. Patterns emerging, like breadcrumbs leading straight to the truth. One address in particular popped up again and again. A sleek apartment complex downtown. Not Dr. Green's office, not a friend's place. Something different. Curiosity became confirmation when I drove there one evening, parking a few blocks away. I watched from a distance as Rachel arrived, dressed casually, her hair pulled back like she was trying not to draw attention. She buzzed in without hesitation, disappearing into the building. Guess whose name was on the mailbox? Elliot Green. Seeing it in black and white was like flipping a switch. No more doubts. No more what-ifs. This wasn't an emotional affair or some fleeting mistake. This was deliberate, planned. But if they wanted to play games, I was ready to change the rules. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home and waited for her to return. When she walked through the door, she gave me the same tired excuse. Late meeting. Sorry, babe. She even kissed me on the cheek like she wasn't covered in lies. I smiled back. No problem. I made dinner. She sat across from me, eating the pasta I'd made like nothing was wrong. But I watched her differently now. Every blink, every nervous glance at her phone, every forced laugh. It was all data, all part of the bigger picture. The next day I called in sick to work. Not because I was sick, but because I had work to do, the kind that didn't belong in an office. I hired a private investigator. Someone discreet, professional, and, most importantly, not emotionally involved. I didn't need speculation. I needed facts, evidence, proof so undeniable that even Rachel's web of lies couldn't cover it. While the investigator handled surveillance, I focused on Dr. Green. I dug deeper into his life, his financials, property records, even his social media. What I found wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker. Turns out, Dr. Green had more than just one Rachel in his life. Multiple women, all clients at one point or another. The man was a predator hiding behind a PhD, using therapy as a hunting ground. Perfect. Because now it wasn't just personal. It was professional. The trap was set. And soon they'd walk right into it. The private investigator worked fast. Within days I had photos, videos, timestamps. Proof stacked neatly in a folder thick with betrayal. Rachel and Dr. Green, together at his apartment at a discreet cafe, even meeting in his car like teenagers trying to hide from the world. But they weren't hiding from me anymore. Looking at the evidence didn't hurt the way I thought it would. There were no waves of grief, no tears. Just a steady, burning focus. They'd built this lie together, brick by brick. I was going to be the wrecking ball. But wrecking balls are loud. I needed something quieter, smarter. I started with Rachel. Subtle changes. Little things to make her uncomfortable without her knowing why. I adjusted the thermostat to be just slightly colder than usual, knowing she hated the cold. I moved her car keys from their usual spot, just enough to make her second-guess herself. I'd casually mention names of colleagues she'd never met, pretending they were new friends from work, just to see that flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was unraveling, even if she didn't know it yet. Then I planted the bait. One evening, as we sat on the couch, pretending to be a normal couple, I casually said, "I've been thinking about going back to therapy. Maybe alone this time. It feels like I've got some unresolved stuff." Rachel's reaction was immediate, too immediate. Her body tensed slightly before she forced a supportive smile. "That's a great idea. It could really help you process things." "I bet it could. I was thinking of trying someone new, though," I added, watching her closely. "Fresh perspective." She hesitated just for a second, but I caught it. "Oh? I mean, Dr. Green is really good. But sure, whatever feels right." There it was. The panic, hidden behind casual indifference. The next day, I left my laptop open on the kitchen counter, a browser tab visible with search results for infidelity recovery therapists and divorce lawyers. I wasn't sloppy, I did it on purpose. By the time I got home, I could tell she'd seen it. Her energy was off. Too attentive. Too sweet. Like a child trying to cover up a broken vase. "Rough day?" she asked, handing me a drink without me even asking. "Oh, I replied, sipping slowly. "Just thinking about the future." I could almost hear her heartbeat speeding up. Meanwhile, the private investigator had uncovered something even more interesting. Dr. Green's little side business. He wasn't just seeing clients. He was blackmailing some of them, using their vulnerabilities from therapy sessions against them, manipulating not just emotionally but financially. That was the leverage I needed. I made an anonymous report to the state licensing board, attaching evidence that hinted at his misconduct. Just enough to spark an investigation but not enough to tip my hand. While that was brewing, I planned my next move. I invited Rachel to dinner. A nice restaurant, the kind we hadn't gone to in months. She dressed up, probably thinking I was going to apologize for whatever imaginary wrongs she'd convinced herself I'd committed. We ordered wine, made small talk. She was relaxed, confident. She thought she was winning. Halfway through the meal, I leaned in and said softly, "I know." Her smile froze. "Know what?" I took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. "About you and Elliot." Silence. She blinked, her mouth opening slightly as if words might come out. But they didn't. Not right away. When they did, they weren't apologies. They were lies. "It's not what you think." I laughed, shaking my head. "Don't insult me." She tried to recover, her voice shaky but determined. "We were just talking." I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. Photos, videos, proof. She didn't even bother denying it after that. But I wasn't done. "I don't want an apology," I said quietly. "I just wanted to see how far you'd go before you broke." Her face was pale now, her hands trembling slightly. "But don't worry," I added, standing up and tossing some cash on the table. "This isn't the end. It was just the beginning." The drive home after that dinner was silent, except for the faint sound of Rachel's shallow breathing. She stared out the passenger window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. No words. No tears. Just silence. It was the quietest admission of guilt I'd ever witnessed. When we got home, she finally broke. "Mark, wait," she blurted as I headed toward the bedroom. Her voice was shaky, desperate, completely different from the woman who'd been so confident sitting across from me in therapy, weaving lies like it was second nature. I stopped, turning just enough to see her standing there in the dim hallway light, her face pale, eyes glistening. I made a mistake," she stammered. "It wasn't serious. It just happened. We weren't in a good place and I felt. Spare me." I cut in coldly. "This isn't some accidental mistake, Rachel. You didn't trip and fall into an affair. You planned this. You lied, every day with a straight face. You sat in therapy, playing the victim while sneaking around like it was nothing." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "It wasn't like that. I never wanted to hurt you." That line almost made me laugh. It's funny how people think betrayal comes without consequences. As if the act itself doesn't leave scars deeper than any wound. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated slowly, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone. "But you did, over and over. And the best part? I let you." She stepped closer, reaching out like she was going to touch my arm, but I stepped back, watching her realize that whatever power she thought she had over me was gone. That was the first taste of satisfaction. "I'll move out tomorrow," she whispered, her voice small now, defeated. But I wasn't done. "Oh no, you're staying," I said sharply. "You're going to sit in this house, sleep in that bed, and feel every ounce of discomfort until I say otherwise. You'll wake up every morning knowing that I know. You'll look at me across the table, feel the walls closing in, and realize you don't control anything anymore." Her breath hitched, and for the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. I left her standing there, frozen in that hallway filled with shadows. But my revenge wasn't just about Rachel. Dr. Green was next. The licensing board had already responded to my anonymous report, launching an investigation into his ethical practices. But that was just the start. I reached out to one of his other former clients, a woman named Laura, whose story I'd uncovered through the investigator. Laura had been manipulated too, strung along under the guise of therapy until her personal life was in shambles. The moment I contacted her, she was eager to talk. We met at a quiet cafe. Laura was sharp, angry, and most importantly, willing to help. "He did the same thing to me," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "I thought I was the problem, but it was him the whole time." I slid a folder across the table, filled with evidence of his affairs, manipulations, and financial fraud. "I'm going to take him down, but I can't do it alone." She flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing with every page. When she looked up, her expression was a mirror of mine. Calm, calculated, cold. "I'm in," she said simply. The plan was taking shape. By the time I got home that night, Rachel was sitting in the dark, waiting. "I thought we could talk," she whispered, her voice fragile, as if pretending the right words could fix this. I looked at her, really looked at her. Not the woman I married, but the stranger she'd become. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, my voice steady, emotionless. And for the first time, she believed me. Rachel didn't sleep that night. I heard her pacing down the hall, her footsteps soft but frantic against the hardwood floors. Occasionally, she'd stop outside the bedroom door like she was gathering the courage to come in. She never did. I slept like a rock. The next morning, I went through my routine as if nothing had happened. Shower, coffee, briefcase. But beneath that calm exterior, every move was calculated. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control. She watched me from the kitchen, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. "Mark," she whispered, her voice hoarse from either crying or rehearsing excuses. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee, grabbed my keys, and left. At the office, I met with Laura again. She'd been busy. Turns out, Dr. Green's skeletons weren't just in his closet. They were practically bursting out. Financial discrepancies, unethical relationships with multiple clients, even evidence of manipulating vulnerable women into signing over large sums of money under the guise of investment opportunities. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a predator. Perfect. We decided to escalate things. Laura contacted a few more of his former clients, women who'd been manipulated, deceived, and discarded. Each had their own story, but the pattern was the same. Dr. Green's signature blend of charm, control, and emotional exploitation. By the end of the day, we had a coalition, a group of people with one goal: destroy Elliot Green. Meanwhile, at home, Rachel was unraveling. She started texting me obsessively. "Can we talk? Please, I need to explain. I miss you."
"I'm sorry."
I didn't reply. Silence is a powerful weapon. It forces people to sit with their guilt, to replay every mistake, every lie, without the comfort of closure. But I wasn't done with her yet. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. She was sitting on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She jumped up when she saw me, her eyes wide with hope, or maybe fear. "Mark, can we?" I cut her off with a simple gesture, holding up my hand. "I'm not here to talk." She froze. "I know everything, Rachel," I continued calmly. "The texts, the meetings, the lies." I stepped closer, watching her flinch slightly. "But do you know what's worse than betrayal?" She didn't answer. "Being predictable," I whispered. "You thought you could outsmart me, thought I'd react like every other fool who's been cheated on. But I'm not here to cry, Rachel. I'm here to win." Her face crumpled, but I wasn't moved. "Oh, and one more thing," I added, pulling out my phone. "I've been recording this entire conversation." Her eyes darted to the phone, panic rising. "You see, I needed you to admit it. For legal reasons." I smiled coldly. Divorce proceedings can get messy, but not when you've got solid evidence. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, trembling. I leaned in, my voice a whisper. "This isn't the worst part, Rachel. Not even close." I stood up, straightened my jacket, and headed for the door. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said over my shoulder. "Sleep well." I knew she wouldn't. The next morning, Rachel was already awake when I left for work. She sat at the kitchen table, her untouched coffee going cold, her eyes swollen from a night without sleep. She didn't say a word as I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. Good. I preferred the silence. At the office, Laura had news. The licensing board had officially opened an investigation into Dr. Green. His practice was under review, and whispers of misconduct were spreading through professional circles. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want his career in jeopardy. I wanted his life to unravel. So we escalated. I compiled every piece of evidence we had. Financial fraud, unethical relationships with clients, even tax evasion. The man was sloppy, arrogant enough to believe he was untouchable. That arrogance was his weakness. I packaged the evidence neatly, attached an anonymous letter detailing his manipulations, and sent it to 3 key places: the state's medical board, the IRS, and, most importantly, his wife. Yes, Dr. Green was married. A detail he likely kept hidden from his vulnerable clients, including Rachel. His wife, Amanda, was a lawyer, a fact that made the move even sweeter. By the time I got home that evening, Rachel's fragile composure had completely cracked. She was pacing the living room, her phone in hand. When she saw me, she rushed over, her face flushed with desperation. "Mark!" she gasped. "Something's wrong. Elliot's wife, she found out. She's threatening to ruin him. He says someone's been digging into his life." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "And this is my problem because—" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You did this, didn't you?" I gave her a slow, deliberate smile. "I told you this wasn't over." She sank onto the couch, her face crumbling. "Why are you doing this?" I walked over, leaning down so our faces were inches apart. "Because you thought you could break me. You thought I'd be just another man who gets cheated on, cries, begs, forgives. But you underestimated me." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. "Oh, and Rachel," I added, standing up, "check your email." She grabbed her phone with trembling hands, opening the inbox. Her face turned white as she read the message. A forwarded email I'd sent from my account to every one of her colleagues, family members, and friends. Subject line: "The truth about Rachel." Attached were photos, screenshots of messages, and a brief summary of her affair with our trusted marriage counselor. She covered her mouth, letting out a muffled sob. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Because you deserved it." As I walked away, her sobs followed me down the hall like an echo. But I wasn't done yet. Not with her. And definitely not with Dr. Green. The day after I detonated Rachel's carefully crafted double life, I focused my attention fully on Dr. Green. The man who thought he could manipulate lives, twist vulnerabilities into personal gain, and walk away unscathed. Not on my watch. His downfall was already in motion. The anonymous tips I'd sent had done their job. His wife, Amanda, had responded exactly as I'd hoped. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, especially one with a law degree and a sharp mind for financial forensics. She reached out to me the next day. Her email was short, precise, and filled with the same cold fury I'd been harboring for weeks. "We need to talk," I agreed. We met at a discreet cafe downtown. Amanda was poised, her expression tight with controlled rage. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "I've seen the evidence," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, client lists, hidden accounts, proof that Dr. Green had been siphoning money from both personal and professional sources. "He's not just a cheater," she continued, her jaw clenched. "He's a fraud." "Exactly," I replied, my voice calm. "And fraud can destroy more than just a marriage." Amanda had already filed for divorce, but she wanted more. She wanted to ensure that Green lost everything: his license, his assets, his reputation. I was happy to help. We crafted a plan. Amanda would file a formal lawsuit against him, citing not only infidelity but financial misconduct. The licensing board's investigation would gain momentum with her testimony, and the IRS would soon be knocking on his door, thanks to the documents I'd provided. Meanwhile, I leaked parts of the story to a few well-placed contacts in the media. Nothing too explicit, just enough to spark curiosity. "Prominent marriage counselor under investigation for ethical violations." The headlines read a week later. His career was crumbling, and it was glorious to watch. But the final nail in the coffin came when Amanda agreed to publicly expose his manipulations. She held a press conference, standing tall and composed, as she detailed how her husband had abused his position of power to exploit vulnerable women, including my wife. Rachel's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew. She saw it all unfold on the news, sitting on the same couch where she'd once texted him, smiling at his pathetic reassurances. Now she was crumbling piece by piece. That night she tried to talk to me again. "I didn't know he was married," she sobbed, her voice hollow. "I didn't know he was like that."
I stirrte her, emotionless.
"You didn't care to know. That's the difference." She reached for me, desperation in her eyes. "Mark, please. I was stupid. I made a mistake." I stepped back, my face a mask of indifference.
No, Rachel.
A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was a choice. Her tears didn't move me. Nothing about her did anymore. She'd already lost me. Now she was losing herself. And Dr. Green? He'd lost everything. But I wasn't finished. There was one more piece left to play. Dr. Green's life was collapsing fast. His face was plastered on news sites, headlines screaming about unethical practices and financial fraud. Rachel sat glued to the TV, her face pale, eyes hollow. She didn't cry anymore. She just stared, like she was trying to process the wreckage she helped create. "Turn it off," she whispered one night, her voice brittle. I didn't. I wanted her to watch, to see the man she'd thrown everything away for fall apart in real time. The clinic fired him. His license was suspended. Amanda drained his accounts and filed lawsuits that would bury him in legal battles for years. But the best part? He tried to call Rachel. I watched her phone buzz on the table, his name flashing across the screen. She didn't answer. I smiled. Days passed, but Rachel didn't recover. She drifted around the house like a ghost, hollow-eyed and silent. One evening, I came home to find her packing a suitcase. She looked up, her face a mix of shame and exhaustion. "I'm leaving," she whispered. "I can't stay here." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Good." She blinked, clearly expecting more. An argument, maybe even a plea. But I was done. As she zipped her bag, I added softly, "You're not just leaving this house, Rachel. You're leaving the life you destroyed." She paused, her shoulders shaking slightly. But I didn't care. She walked out without another word. And I never looked back. The divorce was swift. I had all the evidence, photos, texts, recorded conversations. My lawyer didn't have to work hard. Rachel didn't contest anything. She couldn't. She knew fighting was pointless. She sat across from me in the courtroom, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No makeup, no rehearsed charm, just the raw shell of the woman she used to be. The judge's words were just noise. The only thing that mattered was the outcome, everything in my favor. When it was over, she tried to catch my eye. Maybe for closure, maybe for some scrap of the man who used to love her. But I didn't give her that. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out without a word. Life felt quieter after the divorce. Not peaceful, just quiet. I moved into a new apartment, minimalistic and clean, with no echoes of the life I'd left behind. No framed photos, no memories tucked in drawers. Just space. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through mutual friends. Rachel was struggling, jobless, isolated, her reputation stained. Dr. Green? He'd lost everything. His license, his marriage, his career. Last I heard, he was drowning in debt, living out of a rundown apartment. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. It was something colder, a quiet, hollow kind of justice. I never responded to Rachel's last message.
"I'm sorry."
It was too late. Months passed. Seasons changed. Life moved on. One evening, I sat alone with a glass of whiskey, staring out over the city lights.
No noise. No distractions.
Just me, and the memories that refused to fade. I thought about Rachel, about Dr. Green, about the man I was before all of this. I wasn't the same. Revenge had a way of changing you, leaving scars even when you're the one holding the knife. But I didn't regret it. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Betrayal doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. And I chose to win.